cat stopped in the middle of the path and then it stared straight at me. I was terrified. It'll bring a tear to my eye thinking about it, just my emotion that I felt that day.
I just froze. Didn't want to move because I didn't want it coming towards me or anything, something like that. You think, where the hell has that come from?
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. With this instalment, we are on episode 99, and we're coming to you in late July 2023 if you're listening on schedule. For this episode, we are joined by Phebe from Nottinghamshire in the North East Midlands of England, but we're going to be talking about incidents in different parts of England and Wales from back in the 1980s and 1990s and beyond. So Phebe, thanks so much for coming on the show. How are you?
Oh, very pleased to be here, thank you.
Before we get into your very first big cat encounter, we ought to hear about how you discovered the subject. Was it because you had the first encounter we're about to hear about, or did you have an introduction to the subject for another reason?
I always had a great interest in all creatures, particularly became a bird watcher. But what did strike me was these very odd sightings that were sometimes in the papers about lions. And I thought, what are lions doing? And the adults would say, oh, it's just one that escaped from a zoo from somewhere. And I was thinking, how is that okay? If we have a lion escape from a zoo, this is not good. And I did look at things in the paper. There were mention about the Surrey puma. And I knew there were some exotics loose because I went on a picnic when I was about 12 with my mum and my stepdad, my little sister, up in the Derbyshire Peaks. And Dad said, there's a kangaroo behind you. And I thought, oh, yes, he's making a dad joke, And we just thought, oh, yeah, right. He said, no, it's a kangaroo. And then we thought, as English was not his first language, he might have got a little bit mixed up. And we turned round, and there was a wallaby, with a young wallaby, which put its pouch. I mean, in fact, there was a flock of wallabies that lived up in the Peak District for many years. They escaped from somewhere in the 30s. I don't know if they only left, they were killed off, I think, in a very bad winter. But the fact that we had an animal there living very successfully that was certainly not native did contribute towards me taking an interest in non-native animals. Then eventually I went to university at UEA in Norwich in 1963, and there were odd sightings being mentioned then of various animals seen around cat-like. People tied it up with the legend of Black Shuck, who was said to haunt the fens, and fen tigers and all kinds of things. And a lot of people just thought it was, people being a bit imaginative who had, read myths and history. But I kept it very much in mind. And then when I went to London, I worked there for about 19 years, and not being an urban person, I always got out at the weekends, did some bird watching in the reserves, and that's how I ended up seeing the lynx. I used to go out to Broxbourne, Cuffley, and round about there, and there's some very good nature reserves around there, and I could take a day trip out, take a picnic, have a nice time, and I got to know some of the rangers. And one ranger of one particular wood told me that he had actually seen this lynx jump across a path right in front of him in the middle of the morning, and he got a really good view of it. And he was most annoyed that people said he must have been drunk, because he said, would he be on duty drunk at 11 in the morning? And he thought that was very insulting. And I said, well, look, I believe you because there are other sightings around. And what I decided to do was to go back with a friend who lived near me in London and was a very experienced woodsman and deer stalker. His experience was mainly up in the northwest of England, though. But we went out, and it was deep snow, and this was New Year's Eve 1984. Beautiful, crisp, deep snow. And we were just turning to go home. We found nothing, no tracks, absolutely nothing. And we could see the sunset with trees outlined against it, and Richard suddenly said, "There it is." And there was this beautiful lynx outlined, clear, dark shape. You couldn't see the colours, but you could see the shape and the short tail against the setting sun. And it did the most enormous leap, nothing that an ordinary cat could have done. You didn't hear it land, it just vanished into the brambles. And we had our torches and we walked rushed straight up. And we saw the footprints and we measured the footprints, and that paw was 3¼ inches across. And it was a beautiful cat print. There was no two ways about it. But we're talking before the days of mobile phones or anything like that, and not having anything to make a plaster cast with. And it now beginning to snow heavily, we just made our way home. We were a little bit cautious about telling people about it, simply because it was New Year's Eve. And while both of us were stone cold sober, you know what people are inclined to say. So we just told a few close friends and fellow enthusiasts with wildlife and things. And then I started to think about doing it a bit more. And we did some searches around Surrey where there'd been some sightings, found nothing. And then the Isle of Wight sightings started to get a lot of attention. Now, I had friends in the Isle of Wight, so I knew the island a bit. I met Di Frances because she went down to visit. She'd been down to visit there the year before I did. And I went in 1985 when there was a lot of very active sightings. There was a really hot summer where some of the streams in, for instance, the Parkhurst forest, where I mostly was searching, had dried up completely. And a big cat was coming out to drink from a cattle water trough in a field that was next to the forest. Many sightings by local people and by the farmer. We didn't see it, but I was camping with another one of the team in this field, and in the middle of the night, I heard something drinking from the water fountain, and then I heard this sawing sound, you know, the leopard sawing sound, going straight past the tent, which was somewhat disturbing. But we didn't find any prints. The problem there was that everything was so dry, there was nothing that would take a print very much. We found scratches on trees and things like that, and the farmer had a number of sheep killed.
What was the date of those Isle of Wight sightings? Because there was a puma got out of one of the zoo establishments in the Isle of Wight probably after that. Were you following up a Black Panther type report, Phoebe, at the time?
We were following up this particular Black Panther because Ken Frogbrook, who was the farmer who owned most of that forest, had seen this one. And the other people who lived bordering the forest had also seen it. We knew of other sightings, but we weren't concerned with those. The puma one, I believe, was later. But what I did notice, which made sense of a lot of sightings, was there's a huge railway network on the Isle of Wight. There are some long disused Victorian lines, apart from the main railway line that goes round, that have been shut. Well, I think some of them may have been shut before beaching. They were mainly used when Victoria was there and the island was really popular. They got grown over. At the time I was there in 85, you couldn't get down them, you couldn't walk down them. I don't know what they're like now. It could well have been that some of them have been opened up as footpaths and cycle paths, as they have in many parts of the country. At that point, things could scuttle along, deer, badgers, foxes, anything you fancy, and they literally would not be seen from the top of the bank above. There was so much of it.
Well, an island like that is very interesting to think about how such animals did get there in the first place. Were they dumped pets, or were they escapees, or did they come on boats? Were they shipwrecked boats with dodgy cargo on? All of those sorts of things can happen.
They can indeed happen, but I'm thinking we're talking of dumped pets, because people who could afford to keep big cats and the like have tended to do so for years until it was regulated. And it's possible that there may be, even before the Act which controlled everything, before the two world wars, even before earlier wars, I mean, young men are the type of people who are going to be mostly bringing these cats in. They're hardly a Victorian lady's domestic pet. So when you're talking about around 1914, people are going off to war. Again, 1938, 39, I think a fair number have been let loose then.
I think wartime were events of releases, certainly, and meat shortages in those times.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. Very difficult to feed them. There are a fair number of deer on the island and rabbits and things. I suppose they thought they could manage.
Can we just go back to the Lynx sighting? So very interesting that you went back and you were rewarded with that view. When you said it was leaping, was it leaping to sort of clutch prey, or was it just leaping, bounding away, and you noticed how exaggerated its leap was compared to a normal cat's?
Well, when we looked at it, it was also looking at us. From the silhouette, its face was turned towards us, and it was like thinking, oops, humans, and it did this enormous leap. And Juno, I think it must have covered 20 to 30 feet in that leap. It just flew through the air into the bracken.
Yeah, because that is a characteristic feature of lynx. And of course, they can leap up to clutch pheasants and birds. And it's one of the things that they get tested out in zoos for enrichment. Their chicken dinner or whatever is put up high in the cage, in the enclosures, for them to leap up and earn their supper, as it were. And that was in Hertfordshire, you said Broxbourne, so that was just north of Epping Forest area, mid-north, edge of Greater London, yeah?
Yes, it was. It was. And there is a lot of woodland there. There are more official parks. Obviously, things have been reorganised a bit since 1984, but I believe that park is still there. It is in the green belt. There is a lot of greenery. There are a lot of deer. They were there, and there are even more now.
You were becoming somebody who was researching, investigating, looking into the subject, following things up as part of your interest in natural history then?
Yes, I was indeed. When I was in Anglia, I did take an interest in coypu, because at that time there were a lot of coypu around, and of course there was an attempt to exterminate them, which they never totally succeeded. There's still a few knocking around, but they thought it might destroy the reed industry, which of course has collapsed anyway. But I used to go on the Norfolk Broads, and I borrowed a friend's Canadian-style canoe, which was beautiful for bird watching in, and you could take it down these little tiny creeks that bigger boats couldn't get down. And I did see quite a number of coypu, as well as various birds and things. It was really good for nature watching.
Just for listeners who are not familiar with coypu, they are like mini-sized beavers, aren't they? Quite similar, related to muskrats as well.
They are that family, yes. Very large paddle-shaped tail, and the males have bright orange teeth.
Now, I've heard this from other people, that they were never fully exterminated, and I think this shows you that if you've got a decent population of something which has gone feral, something which is perhaps naturalised in a region, it is very difficult to eradicate. Even if there is a programme to comprehensively eradicate a mammal, it's very difficult to achieve. Now, I have heard from credible sources that there's a rump of a population. My hunch is that it's difficult for a very small population to keep living on in a viable way without genetic issues. It is challenging.
I think that's the case, but I think you have to remember that with an aquatic mammal, they are not going to stay put. And sightings have been reported from outside Norfolk, where they've gone down the rivers. But there aren't enough numbers to really bother anybody.
Okay, so even if you wanted to get rid of one that was on your farm and you thought was going to cause some damage to a side of a dike or something, it might not be there in the next week when the previous week you decided you were going to take action.
It's indeed the case, yes.
Yeah, so where do we go from there? Do we go to southwest Wales?
Indeed we do, because I moved there. I got married in 84, and my husband and I moved there in 87. And first of all, we were up in the mountains near Tregaron. At that time, the great interest was about the reintroduction of the red kite. But obviously, I took an interest in other things as well, and there were some sightings. And these were up in the mountains between Tregaron and into mid-Wales. There are some mountain roads going through to central Wales. And we were just getting odd ones, and a farmer there was getting sheep killed, and he had seen a puma. a very, very big one.
A sandy brown coloured one, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. There was no two ways about it. And it was a nuisance. So he told the local Farmers Union of Wales representative about it. And the Farmers Union of Wales representative has seen another one. And he has actually saw a young black panther as well up near Tregaron Bog. And there were just various sightings all round there. But we were only there a short time when, for various reasons, we moved down to closer to Newquay. So I was quite near the coast. And surprisingly, I got more sightings there.
We're talking about not the south coast, but mid-west coast, yeah?
We're talking about the Tyvy Valley, which runs from Aberyron, just south of Aberystwyth.
South mid-west coast.
Towards Lampeter, and then towards Tregaron. Water meadows there, sheep, cows, everything like that. Once I'd moved down there, I started working as a domiciliary home visiting carer. And I was visiting a lot of villages, a lot of farms. I became much more part of the local community than if I'd been working in an office or something. I got to know lots of people, lots of families, lots of farming families, people who had been there for ages. And therefore, I was on the grapevine. I heard a lot of things. The odd thing is, we started getting some from the coast path. A farmer near us had a big black cat coming up and being seen in his meadows on the coast path. Somebody saw one further up. And next thing, they seemed to be popping around all over the place. By this time, I was in touch with Terry Hooper, and he put me in touch with a few other people who had had sightings, including a wildlife ranger called John Green, who was up near Shrewsbury. He's sadly no longer with us, but he actually saw one female black panther fairly frequently on his own reserve. She'd never caused anybody any problems, actually. But it was as if it was an open secret. Everybody knew they were there. People didn't want to look silly in the local papers. The police knew they were there. I spoke to local police constables who had them reported. People had reported them walking past the car, this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the open secret is so applicable widely to the subject throughout Britain, actually. We're talking about late 80s and early 90s, are we?
No, we're talking more into the 90s here. I moved over there late 80s. Things became more active in the 90s, and very, very active indeed. We're talking about sort of late 90s to the beginning of this century.
Very interesting that you were getting a handle on reports of both colours, both sandy brown ones and black ones, in different parts of southern half of Wales, say. But what about the distribution of deer? I'm sounding a bit like a broken record on the podcast, saying, well, there's some parts of Wales that don't have deer, but do have big cats. Now, what was your take on that? Were you getting hearing of reports of cats in areas where there wasn't a distribution of deer?
There was always a distribution of deer in the time I was there. Not so much reds, fallow, roe, muntjac, lots and lots of muntjac. They were not thought of being common in mid Wales, but a forester friend was working in a fairly remote district, and he found muntjac living in a disused badger set of all things. They just popped out of the ground. And they often don't get noticed because they're just so small and so fast. But the other thing is rabbits, and more rabbits. I mean, on the coast, we had a severe rabbit problem. They would just graze a whole field. And just outside Cardigan, just inland from Cardigan, there was a farmer who had a lynx on his property, and he did not want it removed. It kept the rabbits down. It didn't actually touch his sheep, but it kept the foxes off the sheep. Just lived on his land and ate rabbits and was quite happy.
That's a perfect example of the principle that lynx do regulate foxes. So would leopards and pumas. They would regulate foxes as well.
They would indeed.
Not only actually physically predate them, but just suppress them and suppress their activity and keep them away, basically. So that's very interesting that farmer observed that and was content with that lynx as a result. Now, the other interesting thing is that you were hearing all of this activity, and certainly in the early stages of my interest in big cats in the early 2000s, I was hearing about reports from all over South Wales, especially, all over Wales, but especially mid to South Wales. And these days, it doesn't seem so common to have them reported. And I am presuming, I may be wrong, but I'm presuming the same things are going on. It's just that they're not being broadcast widely because people live alongside them and keep it going as an open secret. What's your thoughts on that?
I think they keep it going as a local secret, but I think also they don't want adverse publicity, they don't want fuss. And if people go out and try and shoot them, particularly with the totally unsuitable guns, it's going to cause more problems. We did have that problem in West Wales of people saying, oh, who will go and shoot them, and going out on quad bikes with shotguns. I mean, you're probably not going to get anything, but at worst, they're going to get a wounded animal who's going to be even more dangerous. The other thing is that farmers are very good at getting together and dealing with something very quietly by themselves if it's a nuisance. Now, there was a big male black leopard, and it was in the area I was near, just in from the seaside. It was actually in some woods not far from there. A lot of sightings of it, and a lot of calves were taken. It was a danger to the cattle, and a few people got together and they got a marksman to take it on. And this was a rather solitary marksman. I mean, we're talking, over 20 years ago, so I feel I'm obviously not going to give you a name. In fact, I don't know the name. They wouldn't tell me, but I know the area the person was. And he was a solitary, bit of a survivalist guy who lived in a caravan and had an awful lot of weaponry, probably some of it unlicensed. And he went out with the appropriate rifle, and he actually found it, and it went for him, and he shot it as it attacked him. And they weren't going to say anything about this. He was assigned to do that. He wasn't going to say anything about it. He didn't want to attract attention. He didn't want people saying, why have you got these guns and what have you? And they just dealt with it. And that was much more efficient than some farmers who actually went out with farmers' hunts, which tend to be a bit disorderly anyway. It's just stupid. I mean, I do know there was one hunt in South Wales, and they accidentally put up a black panther, and the huntsman just called everybody off. They called back the hounds, and in fact, the cat just went whizzing down a cliffside, and the hounds couldn't follow.
Those hunts tend to keep that to themselves, that information to themselves, and it doesn't mean to say any cat got dispatched, it just got flushed out, which was bound to happen occasionally.
Absolutely.
And back to the point about those farmers requesting that the large tom, black one, that was causing problems, especially for calves, be dispatched on the quiet. I'm very sure that happens elsewhere, but it doesn't mean to say these same people are requesting every cat that is around to be dispatched. From my feedback that I'm getting more these days, it's just that the odd troublemaking one is taken out if it can be, and farmers and other people know it's quite a challenge to do. It may take some time, so they're not going to bother with ones that are behaving themselves, and they know it takes a long time and effort anyway.
It does indeed.
That's what was happening in that case, was it? That it was singled out because it was a problem one. It doesn't mean they were actually going for all of them.
That was the case. I think they knew it wasn't going to be possible to go for all of them. But one farmer in Pembrokeshire, did actually try and build a cat trap. And he built it from a sheep crush. And he was feeling very pleased with it. That had some losses. It was mainly poultry, I think. But then they actually saw a puma, looked like a young one. And he decided to make a trap. And he was there putting this trap together and baiting it and feeling very well pleased. And then he saw the cat watching him from across the field with interest. And the cat never went near the trap. Again, there were some sightings in that area. But one of the farmers in that area did tell me an extraordinary tale, which links back to the Tregaron ones further in Mid Wales up the Teifi Valley. He farms pigs, and he went to look at some pigs for sale in a farm in the Tybee Valley near Tregowan. And he went and he arranged to buy these pigs. And then the farmer said, "Would you like to see a mountain lion?" And he said, "What? You got a mountain lion?" He said, "Yes, I've got a mountain lion, but the wife won't have it in the house anymore because it tears up the furniture." And I thought, well, yes, I don't suppose she would. And so he showed him this puma, which was fairly friendly. It was a young male. It was living in a big static caravan. And the reason he had got this, it was after the act. And pumas, as I'm sure you know, were rather popular in scrapyards.
As were black leopards as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyway, this guy had been up to the scrapyard for something, and the man said he wanted to find someone who would take on his puma because he didn't want to have it put down. He didn't want to be in trouble with the police, and the license was very expensive and so forth. So the farmer took it back. He said, "Oh, if the wife loves animals, she'll like that." And the wife obviously wasn't very keen on it. Anyway, then the farmer from Pembrokeshire said, "Oh, I'll take the pigs now and I'll come back for the puma if my wife's agreeable." And not surprisingly, that wife wasn't keen on a puma either. And so he told the farmer who got the puma, "I'm sorry." My wife says, "Absolutely not." And the farmer said, "That's okay. I had to let it go. It bit me quite badly, so I let it loose up the mountains."
So that was a young one that was meant to be retained, and they did try and find a sort of responsible home for it, but eventually ran out of luck.
Yes, they did try and find a fairly responsible home, but I think the scrap man originally just wanted it off the premises. And it's not something you can happily shove around from pillar to post, and so it ended up the mountains.
Hopefully it wasn't declawed, because some more residential ones get declawed, don't they, to make them a bit more manageable?
Apparently not. It was confined to the static caravan because it demolished the upholstery, as they would.
Yeah. And of course, sometimes you get dumped and abandoned caravans and similar structures on farms, and they use those as lay-up spots because they've become derelict and they can jump through a window or the doors swinging open.
Oh, indeed.
You were getting this privileged information because you were on the grapevine and you were trusted and you had an interest, and so people would open up to you.
I think so, and they knew I wasn't going to come round with a shotgun and start banging off in all directions of things.
Okay, so we move on to your actual sighting in that area, Midwest Wales, and that was in the 1990s, yeah?
That was in...
1999, I've got on my notes.
1999, yes. And I actually had somebody with me at the time, a scientist, and it was 11 o'clock in the morning, bright sunny morning. We were on a hillside. We were looking down the valley below. There had been lots of killings in that valley. It was a main hot spot. And I suddenly saw what looked like two huge black triangles in the middle of a field. And I thought, goodness me, those are enormous ravens. And I took my binoculars, and the two black triangles suddenly unfolded into two cats, the size of fairly big collies, I would say. And what I was struck by was the smallness of the head in relation to the body, which was long, and the super long tail, which was as long as the body, with a little hook at the end. And the two of them, I think they must have been youngsters still hunting together, went down the field in a series of leaps, perfectly synchronized, and jumped on something in the hedge below. My companion didn't see them so well because she didn't get her binoculars on them quickly enough, so she couldn't swear to it as definite, but she definitely saw something. But the interesting thing is they were actually very, very close to a farm.
Were you following something up, or did you know of recent reports?
Oh, I was following up. We were both looking up recent sightings. There was a lot going on. Both pumas and a very large black panther had been seen. It was an area where there was a various visibility if you're in the right place. Imagine a very steep valley, steep hillsides on both sides, a few farms dotted about. From the front of your farm, you could probably see a lot of the valley. It was like that.
Do you think this area, which I know about, we're not going to actually name it, but I know of reports there in the 1990s and 2000s. It's just perfect landscape for them in every way. Do you think that they've just gravitated to that area because it's so suitable, or do you think there's another reason why it was good for routine reports? Was it a region where there'd been more releases, or do you think it was just good habitat and they'd moved there because it suited them?
I think it was a region of more releases. I mean, if somebody's going to release a big cat, they're not going to do it anywhere where it's going to create an immediate furore. They're going to do it out in the forestry. We saw a lot of kills, and one kill, there was the evidence of both mum and cubs. There were the footprints of several cubs.
Looking back to the ones that you saw, those two you saw, what really did stand out about them? And are you making the assumption that they were leopards, or was there something that actually gave them away as leopards?
It was the very, very long tail and the little hook at the end. Very long-bodied. I would say the height of a big collie, maybe a big Labrador. Big collie, we'll say. But not square like a collie, but super long in relation to their leg length. Now, the thing is, what people often think of when they think Black Panther, they think of the photos you see mostly, which are usually of a big, powerfully muscled male with a very heavy head. Now, for one thing, that's a male, and the heads are much heavier. For another thing, it's going to take them several years to build up that body mass, that bone, that muscle. The youngsters, much lighter, and also, I believe that the melanistic ones, at least the ones they have in zoos, tend to be a little bit smaller than the standard spotted ones. Though I do have a spotted leopard report from Porthcawl, and that was from the sea part edge, as it were, of the M4 corridor, and along the flatlands towards the sea, there are a number of industrial estates all along there. This was an industrial estate at Porthcawl. Man was leaving his unit very late at night, having been working late. He was driving along, and he suddenly saw leopard crossing the road in front of him. He said there was absolutely no mistake. The back was the height of his car bonnet. It was a normal coloured spotted one. I haven't got an exact date for that one. I haven't found that my notebook when I wrote that one down. But I think you're looking at about 2000, 2001, round about there. The same time there was a mad rush. And I've got here, actually, a copy of the Western Mail weekend magazine from Saturday, 31st of September. I reported from January to September in Wales, 11 sightings in January, 10 in February, 13 in March, 14 in April, 7 in May, 4 June, 1 July, 5 August, and in September there was 4 at the site at the time of going to press.
And this was what year?
This was 2000.
And those were all reports to you from informants around Wales who got in touch?
They were. What I said at that year, which is quite interesting. Oh, and before that, I'll tell you about another farmer who said that there must be a lot of foxes round there because he never had to bother disposing of dead animals in the usual legal manner. He just chucked them over the wall and the carcasses were stripped. I looked at those carcasses. They were licked clean. Not even pulled about, just typical, bones and rug. And what you usually see with a big cat kill, skeleton on a rug, broken neck, and oddly enough, there's usually one leg or 1 foot left, and goodness knows why. Stomach contents often carried a few yards away. If I may, I'll read you what I was quoted in this.
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Phebe Cooper, who's logged 72 big cat sightings in Wales so far this year, believes the government should provide free facilities for the disposal of farm animal carcasses. It should also, she believes, accept responsibility for dealing with individual problem cats. However, she does not rate the chances of any of this happening. citing the government's previous unhappy experience of trying to control another immigrant species. And I then said a bit about koipu. And I said, government agencies have persisted in buck passing for years now. The Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food says that unless there is conclusive proof that cats have been taking farm stock, which they do not accept, it's a matter of the Department of Environment, who say it is a matter for the Home Office and the police. Now that we have a Welsh Assembly, Ministry of Agriculture say it's up to them to deal with it. We are caught between people who see the cats as a horrendous threat and people who think they are a silly season joke. If we do not officially accept the cats are there, then we cannot advise people on how to live with them and what to do if they meet one. And that was my view at that time, and still pretty well now.
And nothing's changed, really. It's too awkward, and it's past the parcel amongst government departments and public bodies.
Well, it has been admitted that they're there, but they say, well, they're not breeding. Well, sorry, but they are. Whether the numbers are dropping or not, I don't know. It's possible the numbers may be dropping. We've only still got a limited gene pool.
Well, yes, but if they've been released at different times in different places...
There could have been some more input into the gene pool. I doubt if very many are being released now. I think it may have, because of other pressures, dropped down now a bit, but there has been an illegal exotic animal trade going through Britain to Ireland. Oddly enough, they released a load of ring-tailed lemurs in Wales, which startled everybody. And a van of ring-tailed lemurs was pursued from the police, by the various police forces, from the south coast up into Wales, and they ended up around my area, sort of south of Aberystwyth. And I was getting reports of what on earth is this thing? Is it going to do any harm? The Tyneside newspaper actually did a nice little article about them for me. They won't have survived because the ring-tailed lemurs just wouldn't. But it was quite horrid because they were obviously scattered at various points during the travels and just released.
Back to your point about trade in exotic animals, I mean, that's gone on across the world, really. You know, sailors and people who travel on boats, if they get the chance to bring back an exotic animal of any type, it's currency, basically. It's an extra little sort of thing that you might be able to sell on the quiet. I do take your point about the island connection as well, but I think it's been ongoing and is ongoing. So we don't know about the numbers, you know, up and down, the dynamics of that across different decades. And of course, as I said, there's a question mark over the lack of sightings, reported sightings that are coming through now from mid-South Wales, but it could just be people just have learnt to live with them and are keeping stum or not getting to hear for some reason. It could be that there are less issues, so there are less sheep killed, so there's less being noticed, and it's very remote forested areas anyway, so difficult to see these animals.
Could be also that deer numbers have gone up. And deer numbers, as you know, are up. Well, in fact, we've got more deer now than we had in the Middle Ages.
So after that event, when you saw those two that you were very sure were, what would you say?
Young black leopards.
Would you say they were independent adults away from their mother at that time, those two black ones?
I think so, but as far as I can tell, youngsters stay with the mother for quite a long time, but gradually move out on their own, and the females, the sisters, often continue to hunt together, whereas the young males, as soon as they start to, feel the urge, they start wandering off. And if they're very, very lucky, they don't get killed by another male, because there is that risk. And they start to set up a large territory, and the territories of the males are very big indeed. Now, I've got a report from Shropshire area, and that is from the late John Green, who I've mentioned. Somebody he knew saw up in the hills in a country lane 2 female pumas with 3 cubs. So that looks like sisters.
Sisters cooperating, and one of them had a litter, perhaps?
Absolutely, yeah.
But the ones you saw back in mid-southwest Wales, you think those were 2, perhaps sisters, just cooperating, working as a pair in that situation?
They were beautifully synchronised for hunting. Yes, they were. They were working as a pair.
Did you do anything following that, apart from look for sign?
Not really, just added it to our collection of sightings.
Did you carry on looking in that area and following up reports in that area at the time?
I did indeed, but then I got more involved in some things that were going on the coast in my own immediate area.
Just to say that area where you had those two black ones, younger black ones you saw, that is the same area as we had heard about from Kaylee, who was our first guest for a South Wales episode, which was back in episode 79. So she saw one last year, early part of last year, 2022. Very credible report on the podcast of a big black one where she was driving early one morning. And I was there probably 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years ago. And I turned up at this bed and breakfast just before the days of Airbnbs were getting going. So it was a more traditional bed and breakfast in this village. I booked in the late afternoon and then told the guy who ran it that I was just going out for a walk in the forest for the evening because I wanted to basically suss the place out and just look for signs of big cats while I was there. It was a summer evening, came back about 11 p.m. And in the morning when he served my breakfast, without any kind of context, he started telling me basically, oh, I've seen two, and these were fairly recent, and he told me about two Black Panther sightings he'd had in the local area. And I thought, hang on, why am I getting this? He's telling the right person, but does he tell everybody over breakfast, or has he looked me up on the web? I think he must have done the latter, but he didn't sort of introduce it, just launched straight in. It was useful information because it was two more reports within the last sort of 5 years in that area to confirm my suspicions that it was an ongoing hotspot, as it were. But yeah, I'll never know whether he tells everybody or whether he had looked me up on the web. But it was nice to hear still going. And now Kaylee reports one in 2022.
Yes, they seem to be well settled in there.
Yeah. So I know you've had also other friends and relatives report them to you as well.
Yes, well, I came back to this area. Nottinghamshire, yes. I was first just over the border in Derbyshire. I rented somewhere there for a bit, then moved in with my mother in Nottinghamshire. Basically, I came back because she was getting very elderly and needed care and support. So eventually we moved in with her. And this is very, very near to Clumber. Now, my mum, bless her, had kept me abreast of local sightings. I knew there was some around the Clumber and Sherwood area. And at that time, a friend of my mother's lived in a large secluded house with a big garden very close to Clumber Park, and she used to put bird food out on the bird table. And she looked out of her kitchen window and she saw full-size, very, very skinny and mangy-looking black panther waiting at the bird table to catch birds.
Not to catch rats and mice that were going under for the crumbs along it, because some domestic cats do that.
That is possible, but this one was actually waiting till birds came down and taking a swipe at them. She wasn't sure what to do, but she wanted to protect her birds, so she banged on the window and it ran off. And then a few days later, one was reported actually in my mother's road, in a local estate which has big gardens and a lot of trees in it, fairly well-grown trees, sort of ornamental cherries, but quite big ones. And some of her neighbours were walking down the street one night, and the tree ahead of them suddenly started rustling, and this huge black cat, leopard size, dropped out of the tree onto the path in front of them and fled. This is works of North Nottinghamshire, 2001, 2002. Now, I've also got a report from that date, but fairly recently. I'm a volunteer warden on the Idle Valley Wildlife Reserve near Retford, which is mostly a wetlands reserve. One of my fellow wardens told me that he had actually seen one on the borders of Notts and Lincolnshire, a place called Gringley on the Hill. And he and a friend had been driving out. I think they were after owls and things, doing a bit of birding. And ahead of them were horses galloping in the road who had actually smashed through the gate to get out of their paddock. And there were these horses around, so they went and they got help and called the police and did all that kind of stuff. And they then went back into the village, and went to the pub, and my friend had gone back to the car, and he was sitting in the car waiting for his friend who was still talking to friends in the pub, and he actually saw the cat walk up the village street, past the pub, and the back was the level of the window of the pub. And you're talking here of about a metre high, 2'6" to a metre. And he said he didn't think it would be a panther because it was long and rangy, but had this immensely long tail with a curve at the end, and it had this rather dainty head. And he had always thought of all the leopard family having big heads. And of course, as we know, that's just your adult males. He told a few other people, they told a few other people, and then one of the local guys who looks after the fishing ponds and does some night fishing actually saw one night. He was there night fishing, and he had his own dog with him, a terrier, and he was close to the bank, and the terrier started growling at something in the direction of his 4x4, which was parked further up on the bank. And he looked, and he could see what he thought was a very large Labrador going round the bank, round his vehicle. And he was rather unnerved by this and went to look, and it vanished. And he shone the light and got this panther actually in his flashlight. So he got into the 4x4 a bit quick. That was pretty close. This was again around the date of 2001 to 2002. But I have got more recent sightings from this area. A couple of walkers spotted one just off my reserve, actually, not far from Retford, and they'd seen it cross a field. And a very dedicated wildlife photographer I know, who is out every day, often around Hatfield Moors, but other places. He's primarily a bird watcher, but he's keen on deer as well. He's got some lovely photos of deer. He was following some red deer and trying to get some pictures, moved behind them into an area of woodland, checked back behind him, as wildlife people tend to, because most wildlife waits till you've gone past and then goes past behind you. And he actually saw one of the black cats crossing the field behind him.
On these kinds of reserves, they might well be taking water birds as well, perhaps as deer and rabbits, do you think? And unfortunately ground nesting birds as well.
Yes, I don't know that we have had any predation that we know of on our particular reserve, which is a very big one. It's the biggest wetland reserve in the East Midlands. I think it's just too soggy for them. They fish by rivers, they love canals, they've been seen along our local canal, but they don't like it when it's unremittingly swampy.
Now, you've got these press cuttings collected all through your sort of career of taking an interest in this subject. Amongst the press cuttings, what stands out from what you've seen?
I think it just confirms the routine sightings. But the interesting thing is, I've got one here, can't find the date on it. It was about 2002, I think. A couple of big cat hunters, wildlife trackers, came from Africa. That was another Western male one. They thought it was most unlikely. They come from Zimbabwe. Everybody thought that it was just going to be a big joke. And they were actually convinced that there was something out there. After speaking to enough people, and after having looked at the terrain, and this we're talking about mid and South Wales, that they think it's completely possible.
Well, I think that's entirely reasonable. It shows they're objective people as well. I've had people give me box files of press cuttings, and it's so interesting that they just really do reflect the ongoing reports that we get in the local newspapers these days. And we've just had a couple of episodes with journalists of local newspapers talking about how popular big cat reports are. Now that it's all online and on websites, those journalists can see what the hit rates are of those articles, and it's a big part of a local newspaper's readership, getting those reports in. But it's been going on for decades, and your box file of press cuttings presumably proves that.
Well, definitely. It has been rather cluttered up by various people who connected it with UFOs and goodness knows what. And this has been a nuisance, because it doesn't help if you mix up different anomalous phenomena, if you see what I mean. Because as far as I'm concerned, this is wildlife. It is not weird wildlife. It is not mysterious or unreal wildlife. It's the real thing.
Yes, it's zoology. It's an awkward part of zoology. And they're very tricky, stealthy animals to catch up with, which can make people think that there's something more to it than just zoology.
Yes, I got here something which I'll mention from Shropshire, and that is sightings between 2000 and 202. There were a great many sightings, killings of livestock, bin raiding, climbing a tree, all kinds of things. And the police actually were absolutely certain that they existed. There were no doubt about it. The former RSPCA regional superintendent, Tom Austin, who kept a file on sightings during his working life in Shrewsbury, he's got a podcast, he's got everything. And he said the RSPCA recorded more sightings in Shropshire than any other West Midlands country.
Yeah, I've just spent a few days in Shropshire, actually. You could be an animal, a mammal in the landscape in those parts and never be seen by anybody for years if you weren't causing trouble. If you didn't leave any sheep carcasses and you were just going for deer and rabbits, you wouldn't be caught up with, you wouldn't be reported, you wouldn't be seen hardly at all.
And the other thing, which is, will keep them fed everywhere if they eat enough of them, there are never shortage of wood pigeons. There are wood pigeons everywhere.
Yeah, and very easy to snaffle.
They're very easy to catch. They're big fat things with a slow takeoff. They're very, very easy to catch.
And they would know, the cats would get wise to where they were landing and pecking around in woodlands, because they tend to have seasonal patterns. I notice on my trail cameras, you get some seasons where it's just ongoing, big masses of them. And then for another season, you won't get any. But the cats will get wise to that sort of thing and know.
Oh, definitely. It's a bit of a buffet snack compared if they got a deer. I mean, a deer is going to keep them fed for, 2 or 3 days if they eat the lot. I have spoken to farmers who have found the remains of sheep up trees. Again, you've probably done the same.
Yeah, I don't see why farmers would lie about that or misjudge it. It's just that for them, it's not a priority to take a photograph of that, but it matters to people like us, of course, who are interested in this.
Well, the strange thing is that there are still people on the social media sites and what have you, the big cat groups, who eventually get squashed, but they go on there just to tease people and say, oh, conspiracy theories, blah, blah, blah. And it's still going on now, but it was the same in Wales. There were people who just said, they can't be. You're crazy, Phebe. And this was people, I knew, but not people who were working in Wales. There was one person who, his wife ran the cattle farm. He was working away in the week. He was a computer person. And he just thought we were completely crazy. And that all the other farmers as well were just a bit thick. He just could not get his head round the fact that he was actually in the minority. Other people were seeing them. And in fact, one of the smallholders was out walking and he knew they were about. He wasn't particularly looking, he was just having a walk with his young daughter. And he saw a big male puma on the path ahead of him. And he did actually what was quite a sensible thing to do. He swung his little daughter up onto his shoulders and made himself about 8 feet tall and stretched out his arms and his stick. And the puma quietly found business elsewhere. And he got home as quick as he could.
In a way, that is following guidelines, isn't it? In America, that's exactly what the guidelines are.
Absolutely. You don't crouch, you don't scream, you don't run, because it will trigger the pursuit response if you do. And he had done absolutely the right thing.
Yeah, you make yourself tall, you spread out, you look like you're up for a fight and it could get injured if it was going to come to you, and you pick up any youngsters. So absolutely intuitively did all the right things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's interesting that you've had this ongoing interest in the natural world and wildlife and mammals and birds all your life, and you've seen big cats here being part of the ecosystem and part of that makeup of wildlife in our landscape. How do you reflect on that now?
Well, I am possibly not with the mainstream of many big cat investigators, because I'm fine with Lynx. They used to be here, and there's loads of deer, there's loads of rabbits. They're not going to be too much of a major problem. I am not happy about puma and panther. To be honest, I wish they weren't here.
Why is that?
Because of the particular problems they cause. if you have got some in an area and they're predating livestock, it's very difficult to do anything about it. It's very rough on small farmers who have a difficult time anyway. It's pretty horrible if you have your horse killed or something like that and foals have been taken. Let's say I'm not a fan. I think they're beautiful, but I really wish they weren't here. And it's great irresponsibility that people did bring something like that and let them loose.
You'd accept that they are similar to lynx in many ways and doing an ecosystem functional role as a lynx to some degree, because they're capable of taking slightly larger prey, including horses. That's the difference, is it?
That to me is the difference. But it makes me laugh when people are saying, let's rewild Britain with lynx and wolf. And I think, oh no, not more rewilding. We've got enough wild stuff already in the terms of predators. I just think it's a red herring bringing more in.
Returning to your attitude to black leopards and pumas, do you accept that it'd be very difficult to wind the clock back? You can't trap and poison and shoot a population of a few hundred.
Yes, I do, and it would be rather horrid anyway. But if there is an animal that is an absolute menace, something's got to be done about it. I would target the individual problem. I would advise people on what to do if they meet one, how to keep your dogs, your children safe.
And you'd be happy if there was an independent livestock compensation system to address the issue for some of the farmers and small farmers and landowners and tenants and crofters who are impacted?
That actually I think would be very important. We did have a cat very close to home, and it was quite unnerving. We were in a little cottage at the time. It was when we were fairly near Newquay. We had about half an acre of land. I kept chickens and things and a couple of goats. And I had 4 cats and 3 dogs. And one night, the senior dog, as it were, 2 of mine were Hungarian poodles, which are flock guards by breed. And the alpha male, as it were, got very, very edgy. And we went out. I usually took everybody up around the back field for last walk and everything before we settled down for the night. All the cats were in the house, not keen to go out. And he would not let us go in the back field. And I walked through the outhouses. I was trying to take everybody up to the back field, and they'd all have a run round back in the house. And he's turned round and he bared his teeth at me. And if a dog like that bares its teeth at you, you don't decide you're going to be the boss. You decide this dog knows something. It's a flock guard. So we went back, and all the dogs and cats did what they had to do in the front garden. Cats dug little holes. Everybody whizzed back in the house. As fast as they could, I shut the cat flap. And I thought, there's something that he doesn't like out there. We'll go on his judgment. And then I heard the next day the cat had been just across the stream in the valley opposite me, and somebody had seen it go through. Big black cat. That was back in Wales. A couple of years after my husband died, I came back to look after my mother. That's when I left. But this would be about 2000 actually.
It does prove the point about people read their animals, their horses and their dogs, and even their domestic cats, and tend to sense when there might be a big cat around because of the edgy, skittish, defensive behaviour of their domestic animals.
I mean, I was once out walking in the forestry I've mentioned, further into mid Wales, and I had the 2 poodles and the Sheltie with me, and suddenly Sheltie looked up at me, hackles went up, and she said, right, back to the car. And she was the oldest dog, and I thought, well, she wants to go back to the car. And the poodles were both very unnerved, especially the big male, and he actually kept looking back all the way and keeping a rearguard watch until we got to the car. We all got in, went home, and the Sheltie went under the bed for the rest of the day and wouldn't come out, bless her. So they do know. They do definitely know.
We'll be discussing candidates for Word of the Week, as each episode we like to have a relevant word. Now, the word that's coming through, actually, I'm wondering if we should do the word exotic, as in non-native, because you've used that term meaning non-native, I think. What are your points about exotic? Because not all non-native animals are problems in the ecosystem, are they?
I mean, a case in point is the little owl. That is an import. And they haven't caused any problems. People like them. They're tremendous fun. And we'd hate to be without them.
They're honorary native, really.
Oh, definitely.
You've used the word exotic, and you use it interchangeably with non-native, do you?
But I tend to be thinking of the kind of animals that people bring for zoos.
Got you. So dumped, escaped and imported animals that are not going to be necessarily trophy pets, but in collections.
In collections, yes.
Another one would be raccoons, wouldn't it? Because raccoons really can cause trouble if they get out in numbers, which they do in places like Berlin and Germany, but we haven't had a real issue with raccoons in this country.
No, we've had a lot of raccoon dogs, which are a different thing, but they're a fur farm thing. And they've only recently had legislation about them. And we did have a great palaver because 2 escaped on the edge of the reserve. They were caught, but there was a great drama about them, which was quite ridiculous. And they were eventually caught. Some people keep them as pets, and it was an exotic pet that people stop keeping now and then try to dump all over the place. We've got all sorts of oddments. The other thing is, which you may have heard of, is wolverines down in Pembrokeshire.
I've had some reported to me, certainly in the past. They could be blatant if they're close by, but they could be quite stealthy and unnoticed in some situations.
Well, it was along what they call the Lanska, which was the edge of the Flemish bit of South Wales, which was invaded by Flemings, and they call it Little England. A lot of English people went there as well.
What local towns are we talking about, Phoebe, for that?
Sort of Haverfordwest and up north of there. Narberth.
So Pembrokeshire coast and inland a bit.
They're not so much out to the coast, but inland. And the reason they're there is that there were some fur farms, and this was during World War II. People started breeding wolverines for fur. It's good for Arctic garments because wolverine fur doesn't freeze. Now, these were great escapologists, and also the farms didn't prove profitable in the end, and some of them got dumped. And there's plenty of room for them to exist. They exist on small mammals and birds and stuff. And it came to my notice because I had a report from a lady who had a farm and a riding school, and she actually found one in her indoor covered riding school. And she wondered what had been taking our chickens, and it was that. And she didn't even know what it was.
Wolverines don't have much of a profile, but they're like dark, feisty, scavenging, aggressive badgers, I suppose, is the way of describing them.
Yes, their aggressiveness is actually exaggerated because it comes mainly from their reputation from fur trappers. Now, if you get a wolverine in a trap, it is going to go for you. It's not going to go and suddenly attack you out of the blue. They'll escape when they can. But when people are actually trying to kill them, of course, they defend themselves very, very ferociously. This is why people thought it was very unlikely that the wolverine stories were true. I mean, I've been laughed at over that one, because why weren't they attacking people? The answer is they don't if you don't bother them.
They do things like actually excavate for bones. They sort of dig into the snow in their native North America.
They do indeed, anything they can get.
Very interesting animals. So are you saying that they were getting out and breeding, or this was just the odd individual dumped ones that were noticed in those areas?
They had definitely been breeding because the fur farm was, I believe, in the late 30s, and my reports were like 2000. And the lady who saw it didn't know what on earth it was, and she drew a picture of it and gave it to her daughter to find on the internet. The daughter found the pictures, and that was it.
And I know Quentin Rose, a guy who was on the case for big cats until he died sadly in 2002. He had some reported to him. He also had a brown bear reported to him in Oxfordshire. And I think a local farmer reported that. And how that got out, that wasn't caught up with for many months in the end. But again, that shows you just a bear can go to ground and not be seen by many people. If you speak to police, they are astonished at the range of exotic wild animals that are reported and get out and are recovered or not recovered and found dead, that sort of thing. Yeah, those wallabies you mentioned, so that started your interest. They were monitored by Manchester University, weren't they, for many years? And I think it was eventually several very bad winters in a row, which did for them. But it was a colony that was, I think, out for decades. And of course, there are wallabies in Isle of Man and one or two other places on the mainland still.
And that there are still some loose around Buckinghamshire area.
There we go. They can be difficult to see, but of course they don't travel very far, so they will be in the same general area night after night.
But they do dig as well, so they can go into undergrowth and into the ground sometimes.
Thank you ever so much for covering all this ground, all these sightings. Thinking about those cuttings and the headlines, how hyped up are the headlines across those clippings that you've got? Because they're from a different era, are they less sensationalised, or they still got a bit of impact to them, do you think?
It depends which they are. I would say they're mostly more thoughtful. When we had the raccoon dog thing, it was so hyped up, and it said the whole village was in a state of lockdown. That was complete rubbish. What people had done was to keep their poultry in, keep any cats and kittens in, watch out for them. But the 2 raccoon dogs, they said it attacked a miniature Shetland, but we think, Shetlands being what they are, it has gone up and been inquisitive and got an earful from the raccoon dog, who was protecting its mate who was with it. Because there are 2, as I said, that got out. First one was caught, then the other. Magnificent teamwork by everybody and some visiting specialists, and we got them. But the furore there was, and it even went as far as newspapers in Australia. It was ridiculous.
What about, say, things like hyped up reports of big cats, the beast on the loose type things, and residents fear panther? Are there fear-mongering headlines, or are they more thoughtful and more descriptive, or do they vary, do you think, if we're looking back to the 90s?
Mainly, they were a bit more descriptive, but there was some funny stuff that came up, because I remember in one paper, there were some reports coming in from the Lake District, and one policeman was quoted of saying, "I cannot imagine how people in a sleepy area like this would know what a puma looks like." And I thought, do they think they don't have books, libraries, films? Do they think that people from the Lake District don't ever go anywhere else? It's like people are saying ho-ho country yokels, which is totally insulting. There's an awareness that some lots of people don't know how other lots of people live.
They wouldn't be alert to a puma until they see one, and then they would look it up and realise, hang on, yeah, that what I've seen matches a mountain lion.
Absolutely. Like the lady with the wolverine. She researched with her daughter and found out what it was.
Yeah. Hearing back from previous decades and reminding people that this is busy, ongoing reports back in decades past, and I think young people new to the subject might not be quite aware that it was a busy time, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s still on this subject. It's not really gone away. Well, so good to hear from you, Phebe, for all of this and this sort of lifetime's work and the fact that you're still on the case. Very interesting. And so if you do get any other reports from your local area, it'd be good to have them.
Oh, certainly.
And people still know locally of your interest, do they? So you would likely get a report if somebody was prepared to divulge it.
I haven't been so active in it for a long time. I've simply been winding up, trying to get all my research together to pass on. So I'm not out and about quite so much. If it turned up on my own reserve, people would tell me pretty quick, mainly because, we know of everything that goes on there. At least we try to know of everything that turns up there. And there's a lot of people observing. And I would probably get reports simply because I've got so much contact with bird watchers.
Although, because something like a big cat is something which people find awkward and they're worried about their impact on their reputation, that sort of thing. So some people would keep it to themselves, do you think?
They would indeed. Yes, there's still that kind of thing about it.
I mean, I do know 2 or 3 very good naturalists who've had very good reports and are very interested in the subject, and they won't come on the podcast. I do accept that. They could change their names if they wanted, that sort of thing, but they think it is very awkward for them, especially if they're consultant ecologists. They feel it would potentially influence their reputation.
Yes, I think there's something that one has to remember, that it's very random if you see a cat. Now, I mean, the famous Iolo Williams, bless him, who, very good presenter, always like his programmes, he has been all over Wales. He has never seen one.
Well, he does accept that people's reports are credible, though, doesn't he?
I believe so, but he's never seen one himself, and you would think if anybody would, it would be him. But I've known people, tourists, come to Wales and have one cross the road on their way in, as it were.
As you say, it is random, but I would say with people like Iolo Williams, if you're often got a camera crew with you, even if it's just one camera person and a sound person, you're not stealthy in a way. Doing TV presenting, you're not doing it by stealth, really.
That is certainly the case. I mean, we've got more chance now with trail cams and things, because they used to cost a bomb and they ate batteries like nobody's business. But now it's all very different, and lots of people have trail cams and they're less expensive and they're easier to keep going. So we might well get something.
Yeah, there are one or two bits of snippets that are very helpful, actually. So it's starting to emerge.
I don't mind about going public, because I've gone public years ago anyway. And if people think I'm crazy, well, frankly, that's their problem. I've stopped worrying about it.
Good on you. Thanks ever so much for coming on Big Cat Conversations. Really enjoyed all of this material.
Thank you, Rick, because I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Okay, well, just to give you a flavour of the press cuttings we were talking about with Phebe there, she has kindly scanned some and we've put a few on the website. So those are on episode 99 of the Refs and Links page of Big Cat Conversations. And you can see that they may be over 20 years old, but the headlines and key messages are pretty much exactly as the subject is presented today. So that's all reassuring in some ways to see the consistency in the reports over time compared to today. But perhaps it's also a bit frustrating in other ways as a marker of how tricky it is to make real progress on this subject. Now, we've mentioned quite a few different animals already in this edition with Phebe, but we're now going to do a shout out for a couple of tortoises. They live in Cornwall and they are very appropriately named Pasty and Fudge. So hi to Pasty and Fudge, and I gather you are based near Falmouth. Hang on, let's just check my notes here. OK, in fact it's Betty from near Falmouth who has the tortoises. Betty, happy birthday! Because I gather you've got a birthday around the time this episode comes out, and I hear you're a big fan of Big Cat Conversations. So thanks for supporting us, and have a great day. Along with Johnny, who got in touch, and I gather your two sons, George and Teddy, are also interested in the big cats. That's so nice to hear, and I hope you'll be out tracking for whatever wildlife you can find in those wonderful woods and creeks in South Cornwall. Let us know if you ever turn up anything, and have a great day on 2nd of August. And Pasty and Fudge, nice to mention you guys as well. It's the first time we've covered tortoises on the podcast, so enjoy your day too. OK, now I need to say a big thank you to the Birmingham rock and electronica band Fabrique, because last time we had their track Shadow Dance as our play-out music, and I suspect some listeners will no doubt be familiar with Fabrique's world-famous tracks Black Lake and White Star. Well, we are delighted to play Fabrique's Shadow Dance and put that on the world stage as a very apt outro piece for us on Big Cat Conversations. And we'll be hearing Shadow Dance again on some future podcast soon, no doubt. In terms of some of our coming episodes, well, we're going to hear from Scotland with both an old case alongside a new and very close-up incident we've just heard about in Caithness. We've also heard of two different really close-up observations of pumas, mountain lions, in the south of England, including one in Somerset which has just happened in July. So we'll be bringing those witnesses to you soon. And I've mentioned before that I've been visiting a stables and surrounding paddocks in Essex over several years, and there's been a big cat there sometimes spooking the horses and seen by local people. Well, we're going to hear all about that long-running case in episode 101. So a variety of reports and locations for more Big Cat Conversations coming your way in the autumn. Righto, we better be going. Time to close out now. So thanks again to our guest Phebe, and thank you everyone for listening and for supporting the show. We'll be back with episode 100 soon. Meantime, take care and bye for now.